So there is a new Heller case, and this one is a challenge to DC's ban on ghost guns. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think it's time for the government to stop infringing on our Second Amendment rights, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also, I want to let you know that this content is powered by the Firearms Policy Coalition, so head on over to joinfpc.org to help support the Second Amendment cause. Thank you again, Firearms Policy Coalition, for supporting this channel. I want to thank one of the new sponsors of the channel, which is Coolfire Trainer. Coolfire Trainer is a conversion barrel for your actual handgun. This system allows you to obtain repetitions with your sights and trigger while also giving you some recoil. With the ammo prices and shortages we have been facing, this is a good way to practice your grip, sight acquisition, and trigger press without actually having to dip into your precious ammo supplies. So if you are interested, head on over to coolfiretrainer.com. Thank you again, Coolfire Trainer, for supporting this channel. So like I said in the intro, a new case has popped up out of the District of Columbia. And this one is interesting because it involves the very same parties that led to a prior Supreme Court decision, which is pretty much the landmark Second Amendment decision that we have, which is DC v. Heller. And this case involves a challenge to the District of Columbia's ban on ghost guns, people's ability within the district to be able to manufacture, to build their own 80% lowers, or potentially even print 3D printed firearms and convert them and manufacture them into functioning handguns for their use. Now for some quick background, if you're not aware of why this is significant that it's the same parties, DC v. Heller is a landmark Supreme Court decision which discusses the Second Amendment and an individual's right to possess handguns for self-defense within the home. Provisions of the DC Code in that case made it illegal to carry an unregistered firearm, but also prohibited the registration of handguns as well. However, the chief of police could issue one-year licenses for handguns if they wanted to, and that was pretty much left up to that chief's discretion. The code also contained provisions that required owners of lawfully registered firearms to keep them unloaded and disassembled or bound by a trigger lock or other similar device unless the firearms were located in a place of business or being used for legal recreational activities. Now there, Mr. Heller challenged this DC code and it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the question presented for the Supreme Court to address in that case was, do the provisions of the District of Columbia Code that restrict the licensing of handguns and require licensed firearms kept in the home to be kept non-functional violate the Second Amendment? And in that case, the majority found that banning handguns, an entire class of arms that is commonly used for protection purposes, and prohibiting firearms for being kept functional in the home, an area that is traditionally needed for protection, did in fact violate the Second Amendment. So that was a big win, and DC got pretty much just smacked in the face for their restriction on individuals being able to have functional firearms, handguns specifically, in their home. And that is one of the most significant landmark Second Amendment cases we have. And right now we are waiting for the Supreme Court to potentially issue some more. They are taking up the Corlett case. There's going to be oral arguments in that case on November 3rd. But right now, Heller is one of the most significant cases we have. This case involves the district code, which flatly bans the manufacture of firearms within the city. DC outlaws the possession of so-called ghost guns. They specifically define ghost guns as a firearm that, after the removal of all the parts other than the receiver, is not as detectable as the security exemplar by walk-through metal detectors calibrated and operated to detect the security exemplar. So essentially they're saying that if you were to strip down the polymer frame, take all the parts out, and all that was left was the polymer frame, if that can pass that metal detector, they're considering that to be, I guess, a ghost gun. And this therefore outlaws the possession and manufacture of various things like polymer 80 builds as well as 3D printer builds. So here you have Mr. Heller once again challenging the District of Columbia and what they are doing here as far as so-called ghost guns and infringing on Second Amendment rights. In his complaint, he's arguing that the ability to self-manufacture arms has always been part of the Second Amendment right, as well as American history and tradition. Although federal law now requires a license to engage in the business of manufacture of firearms, federal law has never prohibited a person from making his or her own firearm within their homes. In fact, the vast majority of states place very few or no restrictions at all on self-made firearms within the home. He then goes into a discussion in the complaint on the history and tradition around people being able to make their own firearms before, during, and after the ratification of the Second Amendment, which is really important. this historical contextual dive into what the Second Amendment actually covers does actually point to the fact that individuals before the Second Amendment, during the ratification of the Second Amendment, and well after, were able to build firearms within their home. And here's a quote directly from the complaint. They state that, "Thus, American history shows that the right to keep and bear arms was always understood to include the right to manufacture one's own firearms for self-defense and other lawful purposes. And rightly so, as the Second Amendment, through its text as informed by history and tradition, is intended to guarantee this right as part of the fundamental liberty it secures." Then in the complaint, they go on to talk about some interesting history of polymer framed firearms, and they go on to dispel the whole Hollywood idea that polymer framed guns like the Glocks and other similar types of polymer framed handguns are undetectable by metal detectors. And they even go on to mention movies like Die Hard that have been used to spread this myth that these types of polymer framed firearms, these handguns, are ghost guns and can go completely undetectable, which we all know that is not true. Now, later on in the complaint, they talk about how maybe DC may have a legitimate governmental interest in keeping firearms out of the hands of criminals, specifically unserialized firearms out of the hands of criminals, but the way they're going about it is just not narrowly tailored at all. And because it is not narrowly tailored at all, it violates the Second Amendment. They state that given this admittedly legitimate governmental interest, it is astounding that the DC ghost gun legislation doesn't say a word about requiring serial numbers. Nonetheless, we do not contest that the intent of the legislation may be to address a legitimate governmental concern. It just does not do it very well at all. So the argument here is that maybe DC has a legitimate interest in keeping unserialized firearms from being obtained by criminals, but instead of DC coming up with a narrow code or a strategy to meet that concern, they just outright ban the use of these types of firearms altogether. They ban the possession of these firearms altogether, and they don't even address specifically what they say they are concerned about, which is serialization. Heller goes on to state in the complaint that additionally, the district is apparently concerned with 3D printed firearms that are supposedly not detectable when passed through an X-ray machine or a metal detector like those used in airports and governmental buildings. Again, this is a legitimate concern. We do not contest that the district can address such concerns. The problem is that the district has legislated by blindly wielding a meat axe when the Constitution requires it to carve carefully with a scalpel so as not to intrude upon constitutionally protected freedoms. And in acting here, DC's legislation is so overbroad that it outlaws the very handgun it issues to police forces, as well as a multitude of other commonly owned handguns that it regularly registers to DC residents. So there again, they're talking about just how overbroad this code is. Instead of trying to address this in a very narrow way and trying to meet their governmental interest that they're claiming, they just outright ban these items, which would include as well handguns that they actually issue to their own police forces. Again, a Glock 19 is no different than a built-out Polymer 80. In fact, a Polymer 80 and various other kind of 80% builds have very similar designs to Glocks. In fact, they are very similar because they are pretty much Glock clones. But here DC is saying, no, you can't have those. So this is an interesting case because it involves Heller and DC, the same parties that led to that landmark decision prior in the Supreme Court. This case also does involve the possession of handguns, DC's restrictions on them, restricting the possession of handguns within the home for self-defense. Instead of being manufactured by Glock, these are items, handguns that are manufactured by the individuals in their home for self-defense. Again, it still involves a handgun within the home for your self-defense, an issue we thought the Supreme Court already addressed, but here you have DC still trying to infringe on that right. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below and I'll try to answer the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm or fuel Al Gore's rhythm. It signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos, in this type of two-way news, and then it pushes it to more people. So thank you so much to everybody who's liked, commented, subscribed, hit the notification bell. You guys are impacting this channel. You are helping these videos to grow, to reach more people, and I cannot thank you enough for all the support you've shown me on this channel. So thank you all, everybody who's commented. If you don't have a comment in mind, just comment down below that you're coming to fuel the algorithm, and I'll really appreciate that. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.